All right, so what's going on, ladies and gentlemen? This is Richard Taylor, and I'm coming back with some information concerning the federal court case against former Wayne County Sheriff Deputy Mike Cox. Now, this morning, I spent the morning in a federal courthouse, the Alton Lennon Federal Building in Wilmington, North Carolina, where Mike Cox was finally expected to appear and submit the plea agreement worked out between his lawyer, Mr. Hart Miles, and the United States District Attorney via Dennis Duffy. Now, I arrived at the courthouse and, I walked in the courthouse and I sat in the courtroom number 3. The hearing was set for 10 o'clock, and, as I sat there, I got a chance to speak with U.S. District Attorney Miss Wilkins. And, it was just me and her in there, I struck up a conversation, asked, was she an attorney? And she said, yes, she's a prosecutor. And so we began talking, and she said that she was there for the Mike Cox case. And so as we sat down and we started talking, other people began to come in the courtroom. And then the head district or the U.S. attorney, Mr. Duffy walked in. And Mr. Duffy walked in and he started to speak with Miss Wilkins, and she was like, what are you doing here? I was supposed to stand in for you today. And he said, well, nah, they sent me down here because, this case is kind of complicated. It's dealing with the corruption and the Wayne County thing. So, I had to be here. So that let me know how serious this proceeding was this morning. Nevertheless, at 10 o'clock sharp, they don't play in the federal courtroom. Now, that's my first time in the federal courtroom. By the grace of God, I never got trapped off to that level during my time out in the streets. However, the federal courtroom is much, much different than the state courtroom. Everybody's walking around. It looks just like the movies. All of the federal agents there with their slick hair and their suits and the big burly bailiffs. I thought I was in, like a movie, for a second, but they finally called the court to order, and then they brought out 2 inmates, and both of them were named Cox. One black guy, his name was Roy Cox. I feel sorry for him because he got a lot of charges, facing a lot of time. And then they had Mike Cox. Now, when Mike Cox came out, this is my first time ever being in his presence. Once again, my criminal career ended in North Carolina before he came to prominence. So I never had any interaction with him in that manner. So he came in, he looks much healthier than the arrest mugshot, might I add. But he came in and he kind of looked around, and one of my associates that was in the courtroom said, did you see how he looked around? And now when he noticed there was no family there, he kind of put his head down. So I will start off to say, well, I think the bond hearing, his mother-in-law and his father-in-law were there, and if I'm not mistaken, his wife as well. But no one was there in support of Mr. Michael Kenneth Cox on this day. And so because they had 2 inmates, the judge proceeded to give them, group instructions. And since both of them were taking a plea, he advised them of their rights, to have a fair trial. If y'all want a trial, y'all can have one. You don't have to take this plea. He gave them the consequences of taking the plea, saying if y'all take this plea, when it comes time to sentence, you don't have a right to appeal. He gave them some more instructions about the sentencing guidelines, saying that, when we do the sentencing, there are certain guidelines. There's going to be a pre-sentencing report things of that nature. And as Mike Cox and, the other guy was standing there, Mike Cox looked visibly nervous. He had his hands behind his back, so I was able to notice, like, all the while his thumb and fingers doing like that. So he was pretty nervous, and, because it's my first time seeing him, he kind of reminded me like of a teenage boy. Of course he's 49, but he kind of reminded me of a teenage boy who really hadn't grown up yet. So as he was standing there, they called the Roy Cox case first. He had been indicted for selling crack to an undercover on 4 different occasions. And, he was facing 4 counts, 20 years each. And he submitted the plea. And then, they took him back. Then they brought out Mike Cox. Now, they asked the normal questions. Mike Cox stood up, said, how old are you? He said 49. He said, what's the highest grade that you completed in school? He said, well, I graduated. And they said, well, are you on the influence of any drugs, pills, alcohol within the last 24 hours? Of course, he said no. They pretty much asked him, did anybody promise you anything in regards to this plea? And he said no. And so then he gave him, once again, the instructions about, you still have the right to reject this plea. And if you do reject the plea, you have a right to a jury trial and therefore and so forth. So if you remember the indictment that came out in August when he got arrested, there were 15 counts against Mike Cox. Now, the thing about this plea agreement was that Mike Cox, as you see in the caption, only pled guilty to count 1 and count 2. And I'm going to read those counts to you very shortly. Now, as a part of this plea agreement, the judge said that counts 3 through 15, which I'll also allude to those a little bit later, those will be dismissed on the condition that Mike Cox complies with the supplements outdated or outlined in the plea agreement, which leads me to believe that Mike Cox has agreed that he must do something in order for this plea to be effective and the consequential 12 or 13 charges are to be dropped. Now, keep in mind, the judge also said that the plea agreement is sealed and the supplements is sealed. However, during the reading of the charges, and I'm going to read the charges because he went over the count 1 and count 2, he said that the plea agreement is now unsealed. However, the supplements, that's the supplements to the plea agreement, remain sealed. That is another indication, after talking to a legal associate of mine, that Mike Cox may be, as they call it, turning over or ratting or snitching as a part of this plea agreement. Once again, I don't know. This is total speculation. However, Mike Cox, when he read the count 1 and count 2, he stood up and the judge asked him, okay, well, are you in fact guilty? Do you plead guilty to these charges? And he said yes. And then he said, did you do it? And Mike Cox said yes. And he said, well, and you are. He asked him another question concerning his guilt. And Mike Cox once again agreed. Now, once again, all the while he's kind of, once again, he has a boyish type demeanor throughout this proceeding. Now, the judge went on to say, and I'm going to read these indictments, the count 1. The count 1 that Mike Cox pled to reads from a date unknown, but no later than in or about June 2017, and continuing until at least on or about September the 21st, 2021, in the Eastern District of North Carolina and elsewhere. Defendant Michael Kenneth Cox did knowingly and intentionally combine, conspire, confederate, agree, and have a tacit understanding with others known and unknown to the grand jury to knowingly and intentionally distribute and possess with the intent to distribute quantities of cocaine, oxycodone, Schedule II controlled substance in violation of Title 21, United States Code Section 841. The allegations set forth in paragraph 1 through 70, which kind of details all of these events that we went over in previous videos, and paragraphs 109 through 114 of the foregoing introduction are hereby incorporated reference to the court one of this indictment and re-allege herein. Basically saying, look, we're not going to go through all of that. These are the paragraphs that prove that this count should be assigned to Mike Cox. Now, what's important to know in this count is it said knowingly and intentionally with others known and unknown to the jury. Now, of course, in previous videos, we released the names, and actually the prosecutor talks about those names of two individuals who were listed in the indictment. But also he said others that are not known, which means there were other people involved in some of Mike Cox shenanigans. Nevertheless, he pled guilty to this charge, and according to the sentencing guidelines, this charge carries a maximum of 20 years and no less than 3 years. Now, the second count that he pled guilty was concerning the mail fraud and the wire fraud. And this count 2 reads, beginning no later than or on about February the 1st, 2016, and continuing at least on about September the 21st, 2021. In the Eastern District of North Carolina and elsewhere, defendants Michael Cox and Christopher Worth and others known and unknown to the grand jury. Once again, they're implementing others, which leads me to believe, once again, Mike Cox might be telling who those others are in his plea agreement. Now, others did knowingly and willfully combine, conspire, and confederate and agree with one or more persons to commit the following. Mail fraud, that is to knowingly devise and intend to devise a scheme and artifice to defraud and obtain money by means of materially false and fraudulent pretenses, representations, and promises for the purpose of executing and attempting to execute the scheme and artifice, right? So I'm not going to go through all of that. Basically, what they're saying is when Mike Cox and Chris Worth schemed to defraud the Wayne County government of monies because of the contracts that they secured, because Chris Worth was in charge of securing the contracts, and Mike Cox was able to outbid and actually submit false bid from other from companies to get past or get around the mandates that Wayne County set forth in order for people to be securing these contracts. So basically, he pled guilty to the drug conspiracy and the wire fraud. Now, the wire fraud also carries a maximum sentence of 20 years. Now, when he entered that plea, the judge, as U.S. District Attorney Dennis Duffy, said, look, okay, if this case would have went to trial, what evidence would you have submitted to make sure that this plea is warranted? And so that is when Mr. Duffy started going down a small list of the things outlined in the indictment that we already know that Mike Cox did. But once again, there was something in his dissertation that struck me as odd. One was he listed the two individuals that Mike Cox was alleged to conspire with. He listed those two individuals. Now, I don't know if this was a mistake or a slip of the tongue, but he listed them two individuals as co-defendants, not co-conspirators. Now, we both know those two individuals are in custody now. I don't know if the charges are related to this situation, but co-defendants are normally people who are arrested in the same crime, right? So I don't know if that was a slip or a mistake that U.S. District Attorney Duffy made, but that did strike me as odd, because if they are co-defendants, then, you know, they should be tried in concert with each other. Nevertheless, he went on to describe some of the incidents we've already talked about, you know, of Cox protecting, you know, or tipping off the alleged drug dealers, of, you know, conspiring with them to set up deals and to dump phones and things of that nature. We don't have to rehash all of the counts of the indictment. Like I said, it's a 55-page indictment. You can go back and look at the other video where we outlined it line by line, precept by precept. Nevertheless, in his dissertation, U.S. District Attorney kept saying that according to this individual, this alleged drug trafficker, that Mike Cox did such and such and such. According to this person, Mike Cox did such and such and such. And so that leads me to believe that the people, and actually the prosecutor said it, he said it looks like Mike Cox was grooming these two individuals to kind of do dirty work, or kind of, you know, be up under him or conspire with him. So the way, and I may be wrong, but the way the U.S. attorney was portraying the information that they had against Cox, he made it seem that the information that they had against Cox were coming from the alleged traffickers, which I think is a good thing. Because as I told you before, if they were dealing with a corrupt cop, then anything that they've been arrested for, anything that they would have been charged for, should be thrown out, because they may have been operating under the threat of Mike Cox. If you don't do this, then I'm going to arrest you. If you don't do this, I'm going to plant drugs on you. If you don't do this, I'm going to make life hard for you. So it leads me to believe that these two individuals were very instrumental in exposing Mike Cox and his propensity to operate on the wrong side of the law, being that he has sworn an oath to uphold the law. And so as the Duffy went on, and he kept referencing incidents of, and even one thing also, he said, if this case were to go to trial, we had another sheriff deputy ready to testify that Mike Cox did such and such and such. So once again, that leads me to believe that there are others involved who may have received compensation, may have received immunity, may have been void of prosecution because of their own cooperation. He literally said, U.S. District Attorney Dennis Duffy said that, yeah, if this case would have went to trial today, there were people willing to testify that Cox did such and such and this and that, right? So, and then he went on to the second part explaining how, Chris and Cox kind of defrauded the Wayne County government out of the monies with the wire fraud. And so after he said this, once again, he went on to explain the sentencing guidelines or the plea agreement. But one thing, once again, he made clear that the whole agreement would be void unless Mike Cox adhered to the terms of the plea agreement. And the judge went on to say that, they stipulate that, they were between 700 and 1,000 grams, or maybe it was 700,000. It was 700,000 grams that Mike Cox was involved in. Also, they went down the list of mitigating and aggregating factors, and the judge made one statement once again, which I feel that Mike Cox may be getting off light. He said, well, I'm not entitled, I'm not inclined, I'm not obligated to accept the terms of this plea agreement. I have a right to modify it. I have, or I don't have the right, or I do have the right to negate whatever sentencing recommendations set forth therein. But he said one thing that's very telling. He said, but these recommendations are very persuasive. Meaning, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to go with the prosecutor and his lawyer set forth in this agreement. So, the final result of today was that Mike Cox was remanded back into custody after pleading guilty. So he cannot withdraw that guilty plea. Now, the sentencing date will be June the 25th. So it is then that we will see what will be the fate of Mike Cox. But the most telling thing out of today's interactions and today's occurrences is that plea agreement and the supplements. The plea agreement is unsealed, but the supplements is sealed. As I talked to my attorney friend today, he said, oh yeah, he's telling. Why else would the plea agreement be sealed? Because anytime that you're in jail, especially the feds, people are going to ask to see your paperwork. And when your paperwork is shown, if it has up there that you are cooperating or that you are snitching, then you got a problem. So that is why, and I think that's preferential treatment because of Mike Cox's former profession. That is why his thing is sealed. Now keep in mind also, he came in an orange jumpsuit, and the orange jumpsuit he had on said Brunswick County, which means that's the place where he is being housed as he's awaiting a trial. Brunswick County. Now, I don't know the details of his confinement. I would assume that he may be held in protective custody, some sort of maybe even, suicide watch thereof, because just looking at him, and I just looked at him, and I actually had pity on him because I've been in those courtrooms sitting in those orange jumpsuits, and you always thinking like, Dad, what if? How did I end up in this place? Nevertheless, we all have to pay for our indiscretions. So I was just looking at him. I was like, I wonder what's going through his mind. And once again, he still had that boyish thing that everything is going to be all right, which further lets me believe that, he may be not concerned about anything, because as Nino Brown said in New Jack City, if I'm going down, I'm taking everybody with me. And actually he did say that in part of the indictment when he said, okay, don't matter, I'm going to take this whole department down. So we may start to see more arrests, more indictments, if it is indeed true that Mike Cox has agreed to cooperate in that manner with the federal government. Also, we may see those other two gentlemen coming home. We should see those other two gentlemen coming home because they were integral in exposing this corrupt police officer. So that is all I have. I hope I covered everything. Well, yeah, the indictments or the counts 3 through 10, they just pretty much deal with all of the wire fraud. Like they actually gave account for each fraudulent act that Worth and Cox committed to get the money from the Wayne County government. And counts 11 through 13 were, them conspiring once again to defraud the Wayne County government. And count 14 is when Mike Cox made false statements to federal investigators, and that's it. So, and then the judge also said that, any property that may have been attained through false pretenses or as a result of, your crimes are to be seized, but also any assets to pay any fines will also be seized. So we don't know I don't know what kind of assets he had, but I'm pretty sure that he and his family is going to be in a bad position. But once again, I have to just think about him and also kind of have pity on him because he had nobody there at his court case, which it's nothing they could do anyway. But it's nothing that feels better when you're when you walk out of that holding cell in handcuffs and you can look around and see some loved ones in the audience. However, unfortunately for Mr. Mike Cox, that was not the case. So we're gonna see what happens. If I was somebody with my hands dirty in the Wayne County Sheriff's Office or even in the DA's office, because remember, Mike Cox had a DA that was helping him thwart some of the prosecutions of the individuals listed in the indictment. So if I was somebody in the Wayne County Sheriff Office, court office, whoever, who had my hand in the cookie jar, I'd be somewhere trying to rub on all the hand sanitizer I can get. I'll be trying to dot all my I's and cross all my T's, or lawyer up, whatever you need to do. Because from everyone that I've talked to about the indications that were set forth in this hearing today, that is sort of leaning, like Mike Cox might be ready to roll over. But we'll see. 919-587-7782. Thank y'all for tuning in. Thank y'all for watching. Y'all let me know what y'all think in the comments. Peace and blessings.